Elias Blackwood never planned on buying a house, especially not a cave hidden deep inside an abandoned mountain trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. When the listing appeared on his laptop screen late one October evening, offering a fully built cabin inside a natural cavern for just $400, he assumed it was a scam. Houses didn't cost less than a used television, not even broken ones, and certainly not ones that promised solitude carved into stone. But Eli wasn't looking for a house. He was looking for a place to disappear. At 58 years old, with a career spanning 32 years in law enforcement, Eli had accumulated more ghosts than possessions. The divorce papers sat unsigned on his kitchen counter. His daughter hadn't returned his calls in 6 months. The modest pension from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department barely covered rent on an apartment he couldn't stand to be in. Every wall there held memories of the man he used to be, the man who believed in justice, the man who thought his badge meant something. That man died 2 years ago in a warehouse on the east side of Charlotte when Eli fired 3 rounds into the chest of Marcus Duval, a 23-year-old construction worker holding a cell phone Eli mistook for a gun in the dark. The internal investigation cleared him. The media crucified him. His wife left him. His daughter stopped believing in him. And worst of all, Eli stopped believing in himself. The cave listing stayed open on his browser for 3 days. He read it obsessively, studying the photographs. A wooden cabin nestled inside an enormous cavern, rough-hewn logs forming walls that seemed to grow from the stone itself. Shafts of sunlight piercing through cracks in the mountain ceiling, illuminating patches of moss and the glint of an underground stream. The listing described it as remote, untouched, forgotten by the world. Forgotten sounded perfect. On the 4th day, Eli sent an email to the address listed. Within an hour, he received a response. Cash only. No negotiation. Meet at the Pisgah Forest trailhead tomorrow at dawn. Bring the money. Come alone. He should have recognized the red flags. The lack of property records. The seller's refusal to provide a name. The insistence on meeting in the middle of nowhere before sunrise. But Eli had spent 2 years drowning in a bottle of Kentucky bourbon in a sea of regret. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking about silence, about a place where the nightmares couldn't follow him, about a place where he could finally stop running from himself. The next morning, Eli loaded his truck with the few belongings he couldn't abandon. 3 boxes of books, a duffel bag of clothes, his service weapon, though he told himself he'd never use it again. And Ranger. Ranger was 7 years old, a German shepherd with a graying muzzle and intelligent brown eyes that had seen too much. She'd been Eli's K-9 partner for 5 years before his forced retirement. When the department tried to reassign her, Eli fought to take her home. She was the only living thing that still looked at him without judgment. The only companion who didn't flinch when he woke up screaming at 3 in the morning. She rode in the passenger seat now, head resting on the window frame, watching the dark forest blur past as Eli drove deeper into the mountains. Her ears twitched at every sound, cataloging the world with the precision of a trained detection dog. Even in retirement, Ranger never stopped working. The trailhead parking lot was empty when they arrived. Dawn hadn't broken yet. The forest pressed in from all sides, thick with autumn fog that clung to the ground like smoke. Eli cut the engine and sat in the silence, listening to Ranger's steady breathing beside him. A set of headlights appeared on the access road. An ancient pickup truck, more rust than metal, rolled to a stop beside Eli's vehicle. The driver stepped out slowly. He was old 70 at least, with a weathered face and hands that shook slightly as he approached. He wore a torn flannel jacket and boots held together with duct tape. The man didn't offer a handshake, didn't introduce himself. He simply extended a gnarled hand, palm up. "You got the money." His voice was rough like gravel scraped across stone. Eli pulled 4 $100 bills from his jacket pocket. The old man counted them twice, held one up to the emerging light, as if checking for counterfeits, then stuffed them into his shirt. From his other pocket, he produced a folded piece of paper. A handwritten deed, barely legible, transferring ownership of 1 residential structure located within natural cavern formation, coordinates enclosed. No legal description, No survey, no title insurance, just a scrawled signature Eli couldn't read. Trail's 2 miles in, the old man said, pointing toward a gap in the trees. Follow the creek upstream. You'll know it when you see it. Eli took the paper, studying the man's face. There was something in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or warning. Is there something I should know about this place? Eli asked. The old man turned back toward his truck, then paused. He looked at Ranger, who sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, watching him with that unblinking K9 intensity. Don't dig too deep, the old man said quietly. Some things are buried for a reason. Before Eli could respond, the truck's engine coughed to life. The old man drove away without looking back, disappearing into the fog as if he'd never been there at all. Eli stood alone in the parking lot, holding a questionable deed to a cave he'd never seen, with $400 less in his pocket and a warning he didn't understand. Ranger barked once from inside the truck, a short, sharp sound that meant she was ready to move. Yeah, Eli muttered, folding the paper and tucking it away. Let's go see what I just bought. The hike took longer than expected. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in places, marked only by occasional faded orange blazes on trees that looked like they hadn't been maintained in years. The creek burbled alongside them, its water dark and cold, flowing down from somewhere high in the mountains. Ranger moved ahead, nose working, constantly processing scents Eli couldn't begin to comprehend. Morning light filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating the fog that still clung to the forest floor. Birds called from the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against dead wood. The sounds should have been peaceful. Instead, they felt like warnings. After 90 minutes of steady climbing, the trail curved sharply to the right, following the creek into a narrow ravine. The walls rose steeply on both sides, moss-covered stones slick with moisture. The temperature dropped as they moved deeper into the shadow of the mountain. Then Ranger stopped. She stood perfectly still in the center of the trail, head lowered, ears pinned back against her skull. A low rumble built in her chest, not aggressive, something else. Something Eli had only heard a few times in their years together. Recognition and unease. What is it, girl? Eli moved beside her, following her line of sight. Ahead, the ravine opened into a wide clearing, and there, carved into the face of the mountain itself, was an opening. Not a cave in the traditional sense. More like a wound in the earth, a massive crack in the stone that revealed darkness beyond. The entrance was easily 20 feet high and 30 feet wide, framed by ancient rock that looked older than human memory. But it was what stood inside the cave that made Eli's breath catch. A cabin. Not a tent or a lean-to or some ramshackle shelter. A proper log cabin, complete with a stone chimney and hand-carved doors, sitting in the center of an enormous natural cavern. Shafts of light fell through cracks in the ceiling, high above, illuminating the structure like stage lights in a theater. The cabin looked solid, well-built, maintained with care by someone who understood craftsmanship. It also looked completely impossible. Who would build a house inside a mountain? Who would go to the effort of hauling logs and tools and materials into this remote location just to create a home no one could see from the outside world? Eli took a step forward. Ranger didn't follow. She remained rooted in place, that low rumble continuing in her chest. Her hackles rose slowly, fur bristling along her spine. She wasn't looking at the cabin. She was looking at something behind it, deeper in the cave where the light didn't reach. Ranger, heel. Eli's command was gentle but firm. The dog didn't move. In 5 years of partnership, Ranger had never disobeyed a direct command. She'd tracked suspects through swamps, held positions under gunfire, cleared buildings filled with hostile threats. She'd trusted Eli with her life, and he'd trusted her with his. Now she was refusing to enter the cave. Eli crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He could feel the tension vibrating through her muscles, the conflict between training and instinct. "Talk to me," he said softly. "What do you smell?" Ranger's nose twitched, nostrils flaring. She took one step forward, then stopped again. Her tail was rigid, pointing straight back, the stance she used when locating human remains. The hair on Eli's neck stood up. He'd seen Ranger react this way 3 times before. Once at a crime scene where they'd found a body buried in a basement. Once at a car accident where the driver had died before rescue arrived. And once in that warehouse moments before Eli fired the shots that ended Marcus Duvall's life. Ranger smelled death, or something very close to it. Eli stood slowly, his hand drifting instinctively to his hip, where his service weapon rested in its holster. He hadn't planned on carrying it, hadn't wanted to, but old habits died hard. "Stay," he told Ranger, his voice quiet but firm. This time she obeyed, sinking into a sitting position at the cave entrance, eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the cabin. Eli walked forward alone. The cavern floor was surprisingly smooth, worn by centuries of water flow that had long since dried up or diverted elsewhere. His boots echoed softly against the stone, the sound swallowed by the vast space above. The temperature dropped with each step, the air growing heavy and damp. The cabin door was closed but not locked. Eli pushed it open slowly, wincing at the sharp creak of old hinges protesting the intrusion. Inside the cabin was exactly as the photos had shown. A single room, maybe 15 feet square, with a small wooden table, 1 chair, and a narrow bed frame made from stripped logs. A handmade shelf hung crookedly above the bed, holding a rusted lantern and a few small stones arranged with deliberate care. Dust covered everything, but not as thickly as Eli expected. Someone had been here, maybe not recently, but not decades ago either. He moved through the space, slowly cataloging details with the trained eye of a detective who'd worked hundreds of crime scenes. The floorboards showed wear patterns, paths where feet had walked repeatedly. The table had water rings from cups or bottles. The bed frame held the ghost impression of a mattress long removed. This hadn't been a hunting cabin or a weekend retreat. Someone had lived here for an extended period. Eli knelt beside the bed, running his gloved hand across the floor. The dust didn't lie smooth and undisturbed. There were breaks in it, clean lines that shouldn't exist in an abandoned space. He pulled a small flashlight from his jacket pocket and swept the beam across the floor. The light caught something near the back wall, a straight edge where the floorboards met the log wall. The gap was wider than it should be, as if the board had been moved recently. Eli pressed his fingers against the board. It shifted slightly under pressure. He pulled harder. The board lifted free with a soft scrape, revealing a hollow space beneath. And inside that space, wrapped in a waterproof plastic bag, was a notebook. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he pulled it free. The bag was dusty but intact, sealed with careful precision. Inside, he could see a composition notebook, the kind school kids use, with a black and white marbled cover. He unzipped the bag and removed the notebook. The cover felt cold against his palms. On the front, written in careful block letters, were 2 initials, CH. Eli opened to the first page. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, written by someone who didn't have much time or much light. The ink had bled slightly in places, as if the writer's hands were shaking. "If anyone finds this, it means I couldn't get away. It means they caught me. Or worse. My name is Caleb Hartley. I'm 18 years old, and I'm hiding because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Eli's chest tightened. He turned the page. "3 days ago, I was working my shift at the Marina warehouse in Bryson City. Loading boats, moving in cargo, the usual stuff. But that night, the supervisor sent everyone home early, said there was a special delivery coming in. Private client, no witnesses needed. I was walking to my truck when I heard voices near the back loading dock. I shouldn't have looked. I should have just left. But I was curious, stupid, and what I saw..." The next sentence was scratched out so violently the pen had torn through the paper. "They saw me. One of them shouted. I ran, got to my truck, and drove straight into the mountains. I knew they'd come after me. I knew what happens to people who see too much. So I found this cave, and I've been here ever since." Eli flipped through more pages, his breathing growing shallow. Caleb had documented everything. The fear, the isolation, the desperate attempts to survive. The entries grew shorter as time went on, as if the writer was losing hope or running out of light to write by. Then on a page dated 3 months after the first entry, a name appeared. Captain Mercer came to my parents' house today. I watched from the ridge with binoculars. He told them I probably ran away. That boys my age do that sometimes. He said they should stop looking, stop hoping. My mom collapsed. My dad just stood there. And Mercer walked away like he hadn't just destroyed them. I wanted to run down there, to show them I was alive. But I couldn't because Mercer would know. And if Mercer knows I'm dead. The notebook slipped from Eli's hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Captain Graham Mercer, Eli's former commanding officer, his mentor, the man who'd stood beside him during the Marcus Duval investigation, the man who'd convinced Eli to take early retirement after the shooting, who'd told him it was for his own good that he needed time to heal, the man who'd supervised dozens of missing persons cases over the years, including one that happened 3 years ago right before Eli's retirement. Caleb Hartley, 18 years old, last seen leaving his shift at the Bryson City Marina. Case closed after 48 hours, presumed runaway, no evidence of foul play. Eli had been the lead detective on that case, and Mercer had ordered him to close it. The cave suddenly felt much smaller, the air much thinner. Eli grabbed the notebook with shaking hands and flipped to the back pages, desperate for more information, more context, more proof that this couldn't be what it looked like. The last entry was dated 2 years ago. Just 4 words. He knows I'm here. Outside the cabin, Ranger began to bark. Not the alert bark she used for strangers. The urgent, desperate bark she used when she'd found something critical. When she'd located exactly what she was trained to find. Eli shoved the notebook into his jacket and rushed to the door. Ranger stood at the back corner of the cabin, clawing at the log wall with both front paws. Her barking echoed through the cavern, frantic, insistent. She'd found a scent, and she wasn't going to let it go. Eli moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Easy, girl, show me." Ranger stopped barking but continued to paw at the wall, her nose pressed against a gap between 2 logs. Eli pulled out his flashlight and examined the area more closely. The logs here looked different from the rest of the cabin. Newer, less weathered, as if they'd been added or replaced sometime after the original construction. He pressed against one of the logs. It shifted slightly. Using his pocket knife, Eli pried at the edges, working the wood loose. It came away easier than expected, revealing another hollow space behind the cabin wall. And beyond that hollow space, darkness. Not the darkness of a storage area or a hidden closet. The darkness of another room. Another chamber carved deeper into the mountain. Ranger tried to push past him, but Eli held her back. "Stay." He widened the opening, removing more logs until he could squeeze through. His flashlight beam pierced the darkness, revealing a space about 8 feet square with rough stone walls and a low ceiling. Someone had lived here too. But unlike the cabin, this space held no furniture, no comfort, no illusion of normalcy, just a torn blanket piled in one corner. A few empty cans scattered across the floor, and on the far wall, carved directly into the stone, was something sharp, a series of marks. Tally marks. Eli counted them slowly, his flashlight beam moving across the wall. 1,095 marks, 365 marks per year. 3 years. Caleb Hartley had spent 3 years in this cave. 3 years hiding in the darkness, living on whatever supplies he could scavenge, marking each day on the stone like a prisoner counting down a sentence that would never end. And then 2 years ago, the marks stopped. Eli swept his flashlight across the rest of the chamber. More writing covered the walls, scratched into the stone with desperate urgency. "He works with smugglers. Don't trust the police. Mercer knows where I am." And in the corner near where the blanket lay crumpled and abandoned, "If I disappear, tell my family I tried. I really tried." Eli's throat constricted. His chest felt like someone had placed a boulder on it. He'd closed this case. He'd written the report that declared Caleb Hartley a runaway. He'd accepted Mercer's assessment that the boy probably joined the military or hitched a ride west or simply decided he didn't want to be found. He'd looked Caleb's parents in the eye and told them their son was gone, that they should move on, that sometimes young people just vanished into the world. And all along, Caleb had been here, alone, terrified, marking days on a wall while Eli went home to his bourbon and his regrets. Ranger whined softly behind him, her nose still working furiously. She moved to the far corner of the chamber, sniffing at something Eli hadn't noticed yet. A small pile of rocks deliberately stacked, not natural, placed with intention. Eli approached slowly and began moving the rocks aside. Beneath him, he found another plastic bag, smaller than the first. Inside was an old digital camera, the kind that used SD cards with a cracked screen and a dead battery. But SD cards didn't need batteries. Eli's hand shook as he removed the card from the camera. He didn't have his laptop with him, but his phone had an adapter. He pulled it from his pocket, inserted the card, and waited for the files to load. 6 video files, all dated from 3 years ago and the week before Caleb disappeared. Eli pressed play on the first one. The screen showed shaky footage of the Bryson City Marina warehouse at night. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. The camera was positioned behind a stack of crates, giving a partial view of the main loading dock. A truck backed up to the dock, not a delivery truck, a black SUV with tinted windows and no plates. Men stepped out, 4 of them dressed in civilian clothes carrying duffel bags. Then another figure appeared in frame. Eli's breath stopped. Captain Graham Mercer, 59 years old in the video, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, no badge visible. He shook hands with the driver of the SUV. Money changed hands. Thick stacks of cash counted quickly and stuffed into Mercer's jacket. Then the men from the SUV began unloading the duffel bags, placing them on the dock. Mercer unzipped one, examining the contents. The camera zoomed in slightly, the image pixelating, but Eli could still make out what was inside. Plastic-wrapped bricks, white powder, drugs, a massive quantity of drugs. The video continued for another minute, showing the transaction, the handshakes, the casual conversation between Mercer and the smugglers. Then suddenly the camera jerked violently. Someone had shouted. A man pointed toward the crates where Caleb was hiding. The video cut to black. The next file showed Caleb running through the warehouse, the camera still recording, bouncing wildly. Shouts echoed behind him, footsteps pounding against concrete. Mercer's voice clear and unmistakable. "Stop, police!" But Caleb didn't stop, because he knew better. He knew Mercer wasn't trying to help him. Mercer was trying to silence him. The video ended as Caleb reached his truck and threw the camera onto the passenger seat. Eli stood in the darkness of the hidden chamber, staring at his phone screen, watching the truth he'd been too blind to see 3 years ago. Graham Mercer wasn't just corrupt. He was running a drug pipeline through Bryson City, using his position as a police captain to protect smugglers bringing product across the Canadian border. And Caleb Hartley, an 18-year-old kid working a warehouse job to save money for college, had witnessed it all. Mercer hadn't just closed the investigation. He'd orchestrated it. He'd made sure Caleb was declared a runaway. Made sure no one looked too hard. Made sure the case died quietly. And Eli had helped him do it. The guilt that had consumed Eli for 2 years over Marcus Duval's death suddenly felt insignificant compared to this. He'd failed Caleb, failed his family, failed everyone who trusted him to find the truth. But Caleb's final message said he disappeared 2 years ago. The marks on the wall stopped. The cave had been abandoned. Was Caleb still alive? Had he finally escaped? Or had Mercer found him? Eli climbed back through the opening into the main cabin, Ranger following close behind. He pulled out his phone, staring at the screen, his thumb hovering over Mercer's number in his contacts. He shouldn't call. He should take everything he'd found to the FBI, to internal affairs, to anyone with the authority to investigate a corrupt police captain. Calling Mercer would tip him off, would put Eli in danger. But Eli needed to know, needed to hear Mercer's voice, needed to confirm that his mentor, his friend, The man who'd stood beside him for 15 years was capable of this. He pressed the call button. 3 rings. Then Mercer's familiar voice, rough and casual. Blackwood, didn't expect to hear from you. Thought you'd crawled into a hole somewhere. Eli forced his voice to stay steady. I bought a place up in the mountains near Pisgah. Cave house. Thought I'd check in, let you know I'm still around. A pause. Too long. The kind of pause that came from someone suddenly paying very close attention. A cave house, Mercer repeated slowly. That's interesting. Where exactly? Near Bryson City, remote area, lots of trails. Another pause. Eli. Mercer's voice had changed, harder now, colder. I'm going to give you some advice, free of charge, for old time's sake. I'm listening. Get out of that cave, sell it, walk away. There are things in those mountains that aren't any of your business. Things that could get a curious man hurt. Or worse. Eli's grip tightened on the phone. Is that a threat, Graham? That's a warning from a friend. You've been through enough. Lost your career, your family, your reputation. Don't go digging up the past. The past won't make you feel better. It'll only bury you deeper. What if I've already found something? Eli said quietly. The silence on the other end stretched for 5 long seconds. When Mercer spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Then you'd better pray you know how to keep your mouth shut. Because if you don't, Eli, that cave will be the last place anyone ever sees you alive. The line went dead. Eli stood in the center of the cabin phone, still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. Ranger moved to his side, pressing against his leg, a solid presence in a world that had just shifted violently beneath his feet. For 2 years, Eli had been running from his guilt, from his failures, from the man he'd become after pulling the trigger on Marcus Duvall. But standing here now in this cave where a terrified boy had spent 3 years hiding from a monster in a police uniform, Eli felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He couldn't save Marcus Duvall. Couldn't undo that mistake. But maybe, just maybe, he could still save Caleb Hartley, if the boy was still alive. Eli knelt beside Ranger, looking into her intelligent eyes. We're not leaving, he said quietly. Not until we find out what happened to him. Ranger's tail wagged once, a small gesture, but enough. Outside the cave, the autumn sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Night would come soon, and with it questions that needed answers. Where was Caleb Hartley now? What had happened 2 years ago that made him abandon this cave? Was he still running, still hiding, still alive somewhere in these mountains? And how far would Graham Mercer go to keep his secrets buried? Eli pulled the notebook from his jacket one more time, reading Caleb's desperate words by the fading light. If anyone finds this, it means I couldn't get away. But Eli had found it, had found the evidence, had found the truth. And he wasn't going to let Caleb's story end in darkness. Not this time. The first thing Eli did the next morning was drive 3 hours south to the town of Willow Creek, where Caleb Hartley's parents still lived. He'd spent the night in the cave, sleeping fitfully on the cabin floor with Ranger curled beside him, her warmth the only comfort against the mountain cold. Every sound had jolted him awake. The drip of water somewhere deep in the cavern, the rustle of wind through the entrance, the possibility that Mercer might send someone to make good on his threat. But dawn had come quietly, painting the cave entrance in shades of gold and amber, and Eli had made his decision. He couldn't go to the FBI. Not yet. Not without more evidence than a notebook and a 3-year-old video that any decent lawyer would argue had been tampered with. He needed witnesses, corroboration, a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to Mercer's door. He needed to know if Caleb's parents had heard from their son, if anyone had seen him in the past 2 years, if there was any chance the boy was still out there, still running, still alive. Willow Creek sat in a valley between 2 mountain ridges, the kind of town that time had forgotten and progress had bypassed. Main Street consisted of a gas station, a dollar store, a shuttered diner, and a church with a sagging roof. The houses climbed the hillsides in uneven rows, most of them trailers or small clapboard structures that had seen better decades. Eli found the Hartley residence at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud after the first quarter mile. The house was a single-wide trailer with an addition built from scrap lumber and Hope sitting on cinder blocks in a yard full of broken appliances and rusted cars. A tire swing hung motionless from an oak tree. A handmade sign near the door read, "Hartley's all welcome." Eli parked his truck and told Ranger to stay. She watched him through the window, ears forward, alert to every nuance of the situation. The woman who answered his knock looked a decade older than she probably was. Martha Hartley had gray-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun, weathered hands that spoke of hard labor, and eyes that had cried themselves dry years ago. She wore a faded floral dress and slippers with holes in the toes. She studied Eli for a long moment, taking in his clean jacket and pressed jeans the way he stood with the unconscious authority of a man who had spent his life giving orders. "You're a cop," she said, "not a question. A statement." "I was," Eli replied. "Not anymore." They all say that when they come back around. Not anymore. Like taking off the badge changes what you did when you wore it. The words hit harder than Eli expected. He deserved them. "Mrs. Hartley, my name is Elias Blackwood. I was the lead detective on your son's case 3 years ago. I'm the one who closed it. I'm the one who told you to move on." Her face didn't change. "I remember you." "I made a mistake," Eli said quietly. "A terrible mistake. And I need to make it right." Martha's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Caleb's dead, Mr. Blackwood. Has been for 3 years. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." "What if I told you I found his notebook? Found the cave where he was hiding. Found proof that he didn't run away, that he was running from something." For the first time, emotion cracked through Martha's weathered exterior. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened slightly. "You're lying," she whispered. Eli pulled the notebook from his jacket and held it out. "He wrote this, documented everything. The warehouse, the drugs, Captain Mercer, all of it." Martha stared at the notebook like it was a ghost made solid. Her hand reached out, trembling, then pulled back as if afraid touching it would make it disappear. "Where did you find this?" Her voice was barely audible. "In the cave, hidden under the floorboards, along with a camera, video footage of what your son saw that night." Martha's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed the door frame for support, her breathing coming in short gasps. Eli moved forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said. "Don't pretend you care. You're the one who told us to stop looking. You're the one who said our boy probably joined up with some girl and left town. You're the one who closed the case while we were still putting up missing posters." "You're right," Eli said. "I failed you. I failed Caleb. I believed Captain Mercer when he told me there was no evidence. When he told me to move on to other cases. I didn't dig deep enough, didn't question hard enough. And that's something I'll carry for the rest of my life." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why now? Why come here after 3 years?" "Because I found the cave by accident. Because I read what Caleb wrote. Because I know the truth now, and I can't unknow it." Eli paused. "And because there's a chance he might still be alive." The hope that flashed across Martha's face was almost painful to witness. "The last entry in his notebook was from 2 years ago," Eli continued, "but the cave shows signs of recent activity. Someone's been there, recently, and I think it might be Caleb." Martha pressed both hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Behind her, a man appeared in the doorway. Leonard Hartley was thin as a rail with sunken cheeks and hands scarred from years of factory work. He looked at Eli with the hollow eyes of someone who'd stopped hoping long ago. "Martha, who is this?" His voice was rough, damaged by cigarettes and coal dust. "It's the detective," Martha said, "from before. He says he found Caleb's notebook. Says our boy might still be alive." Leonard's expression didn't change. "Don't," he said flatly. "Don't you dare give her false hope. We buried our son 3 years ago. No body, no funeral, but we buried him all the same. We've made our peace. I haven't, Martha said, turning to her husband. I never will. Leonard looked at Eli with something close to hatred. You want to help, then leave us alone. We've grieved enough. But Martha stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Tell me everything, she said. Everything you found. For the next 20 minutes, Eli told him about the cave, the notebook, the hidden chamber with the tally marks, the video footage showing Mercer at the warehouse. He left out Mercer's threat on the phone, left out his own doubts about whether Caleb could have survived 3 years alone in the mountains. He gave them hope because they deserved at least that much. When he finished, Martha was silent for a long time, staring out at the mountains visible in the distance. We knew something was wrong from the start, she finally said. Caleb called me that last night, around midnight. He was crying, said he'd seen something terrible, said he was going somewhere safe. That's the last time I heard his voice. Did he say where he was going? Martha shook her head. Just said up. That's how Caleb talked. Up meant the mountains. That's where he always went when he needed to think. He knew every trail, every cave, every hidden spot in these hills. If anyone could survive out there, it was him. Did Captain Mercer come to see you after Caleb disappeared? Twice, Leonard said from the doorway. He'd been listening. First time was 2 days after Caleb went missing. Told us boys that age sometimes just take off, that we shouldn't worry. Second time was a week later. Told us to stop looking, said we were wasting police resources, said Caleb probably didn't want to be found. Did that seem strange to you? Everything about it seems strange, Leonard replied. But what were we supposed to do? We're not rich folks, don't have lawyers, don't have connections. When a police captain tells you to stop asking questions, you stop asking questions. Eli pulled out his phone and showed them the video he'd found on Caleb's camera. The timestamp, the warehouse, the drug transaction. Mercer's face clearly visible in the frame. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Leonard's jaw clenched so tight Eli could hear his teeth grinding. That son of a bitch, Leonard whispered. That son of a bitch hunted our boy like an animal. I'm going to prove it, Eli said. I'm going to find Caleb and I'm going to bring Mercer down. But I need your help. Did Caleb have any friends who might have heard from him? Anyone he might have contacted? Martha thought for a moment. There was a boy he worked with at the warehouse. Tyler something. They were close, but Tyler moved away after Caleb disappeared. Said the town felt cursed. Anyone else? Old Mr. Patterson, Leonard said suddenly. The hunter, lives up near Raven's Gap. Caleb used to help him track deer every fall. If anyone saw something in those mountains, it'd be him. Eli made a note on his phone. Where can I find him? Cabin about 10 miles north of here. End of Forest Road 47. Can't miss it. Only structure for 5 miles in any direction. Eli pocketed his phone and looked at both of them. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for it anyway. If I find Caleb, I'll bring him home. That's a promise. Martha reached out and gripped Eli's hand with surprising strength. You find my boy, she said, her voice breaking. You find him, and you tell him his mama never stopped looking, never stopped believing. You tell him that. I will, Eli said. As he walked back to his truck, Leonard called out from the porch. Blackwood. Eli turned. You're going up against Mercer. That means you're going up against the whole damn system. You sure you're ready for that? Eli thought about Marcus Duval, about the 2 years he'd spent drowning in guilt, about the cave and the notebook and the desperate words of a boy who'd spent 3 years marking days on a wall. I'm ready, he said. Ranger greeted him with a wagging tail as he climbed into the truck. Eli sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, watching Martha and Leonard disappear back into their trailer. He'd given them hope. Now he had to deliver on it. The drive to Raven's Gap took 40 minutes on increasingly rough roads. Forest Road 47 was barely more than 2 ruts through the trees, overgrown and treacherous. Eli's truck bounced over rocks and roots, Ranger bracing herself in the passenger seat until finally a cabin appeared through the pine trees. It was old but well-maintained with a stone chimney trailing smoke and a wide porch covered in animal pelts stretched on frames. A dozen deer antlers hung from the eaves. Two hunting dogs, some kind of hound mix, bayed from a chain-link kennel as Eli approached. An old man stepped onto the porch shotgun, cradled casually in his arms. He had to be past 80 with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes sharp as broken glass. "That's close enough," he called out. "State your business." Eli stopped 20 feet from the porch, hands visible. "My name is Elias Blackwood. I'm looking for information about Caleb Hartley." The old man's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because I think he's still alive, and I think you might have seen something 3 years ago that could help me find him." Patterson studied Eli for a long moment, then lowered the shotgun. "You a cop?" "Not anymore." "Good. Don't trust cops, especially not after what I told that captain 3 years back." Eli's pulse quickened. "Captain Mercer." "That's the one. Came up here asking questions right after the Hartley boy went missing. Wanted to know if I'd seen anything unusual in the mountains. I told him the truth." "What truth?" Patterson gestured to a pair of chairs on the porch. "Might as well sit. This'll take a minute." Eli climbed the steps, Ranger following close. The hunting dogs in the kennel went quiet, recognizing a fellow working dog. Patterson settled into his chair with a grunt. 3 years ago, late summer, I was tracking an elk up near Widow's Peak. Big bastard had to be 600 pounds. I'd been following him for 2 days. Dawn on the third day, I'm setting up on a ridge overlooking a creek valley, and I see two men chasing a boy through the trees. Eli leaned forward. "You saw Caleb. Didn't know it was him at the time. Just saw a young fella running like the devil himself was on his heels. Two men behind him gaining fast. One of them was shouting, 'Please stop.'" "Did you recognize the men?" Patterson's eyes narrowed. "One of them was wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself like military. The other one I recognized right away. Captain Mercer. He was the one doing the shouting." Eli's hands clenched on the armrests. "What happened?" "The boy made it to the creek, jumped in. Water was running fast from the spring melt, dangerous as hell. The two men stopped at the bank. I heard Mercer say something like, 'He won't make it. Kern'll take him.' Then they turned around and left." "Did you see what happened to the boy?" "I watched him go under twice. Thought he was done for. But he grabbed onto a log jam about a quarter-mile downstream, pulled himself out on the far bank, looked half drowned but alive. Then he disappeared into the forest." "And you told Mercer all this?" Patterson nodded. 2 days later, Mercer showed up here seeing if I'd seen anything unusual. I told him exactly what I just told you. Figured I was helping with the search." "What did Mercer say?" "He thanked me. Told me it was probably just some kids messing around. Told me to keep it quiet, that spreading rumors wouldn't help the investigation." I believed him. I'm a damn fool, but I believed him. Patterson leaned forward, his weathered face hardening. But then the case got closed, and I realized what I'd done. I'd told Mercer exactly where the boy went, exactly where to look for him, and Mercer made sure nobody else knew. "You gave him Caleb's location," Eli said quietly. "I gave him everything he needed to track that boy down and finish what he started. And I've carried that weight for 3 years. Eli pulled out his phone and showed Patterson the video from the warehouse. The old man watched in silence, his jaw working as he processed what he was seeing. "Drug runner," Patterson said when the video ended. "I knew something was off about that man. Too smooth, too quick to shut down questions." "Did you ever see Caleb again after that day at the creek?" Patterson was quiet for a moment. "Maybe. About 6 months ago, I was checking trap lines near the old mining tunnels. Found a camp. Real primitive. Fire pit lean-to made from branches, snares set for rabbits. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. Lived off the land like our granddaddies used to." "Did you see who it belonged to?" "No, but I found something interesting." Patterson stood and walked inside the cabin. He returned a moment later with a piece of cloth. A torn sleeve from a jacket, faded blue denim, with a patch sewn onto it. The patch read, "Hartley's Marina, Bryson City. Eli took the sleeve, his hands trembling. This was Caleb's work jacket, the one he'd been wearing the night he disappeared. Where exactly were those mining tunnels? Eli asked. Patterson pulled out a topographic map, spreading it across the porch railing. His gnarled finger traced a route north from Widow's Peak deep into the most remote section of the Pisgah National Forest. Here, he said, tapping a spot marked with a small X. Old copper mines from the 1800s. Most of them collapsed or flooded, but there's a few still passable. Good place to hide if you don't want to be found. Eli studied the map, memorizing the landmarks. The mining tunnels were at least 15 miles from the cave where he'd found the notebook. Caleb had been moving, staying mobile, never settling in one place long enough to be tracked. Smart kid. Survivor. One more thing, Patterson said. About 2 weeks ago, I saw fresh boot prints near those tunnels. Size 11, maybe 12. Work boots, not hiking boots, leading north toward the Canadian border towns. Recent. Within the last month, for sure. Whoever's up there is still moving around. Eli folded the map and tucked it into his jacket along with the torn sleeve. Mr. Patterson, would you be willing to testify to what you saw 3 years ago, to what you told Mercer? The old man's face hardened. If it means bringing that bastard down, damn right I would. It might be dangerous. Mercer has a lot to lose. Patterson picked up his shotgun and checked the chamber. I'm 83 years old. I've survived 2 wars, a mining collapse, and 4 heart attacks. I ain't scared of some crooked cop. Eli stood and extended his hand. Patterson shook it with a grip that could still crush walnuts. Thank you, Eli said. Don't thank me. Find that boy. Bring him home. That'll be thanks enough. As Eli drove away from the cabin, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. This is your last warning. Then a moment later, a photo appeared. His daughter Sarah leaving her apartment in Asheville. The image was taken from across the street, zoomed in, deliberate. A message that said, "We know where she is." Eli's blood went cold. He pulled over on the side of the road, Ranger whining softly beside him, sensing his distress. For a long moment, Eli just stared at the photo, his hands shaking with a rage he hadn't felt since the night he shot Marcus Duvall. Mercer was threatening his daughter, the one person in the world who still mattered, even though she wouldn't speak to him, even though she'd cut him out of her life after the shooting. She was his daughter, his baby girl, and Mercer was using her to silence him. Eli could walk away, could take everything he had found to the FBI anonymously, could disappear back into his cave and his bourbon and his regrets, could let Caleb Hartley remain a ghost in the mountains, or he could do what he should have done 3 years ago. What he should have done when Marcus Duvall raised that cell phone in the dark warehouse. He could trust his instincts, fight for the truth, even if it cost him everything. Eli called Sarah. She didn't answer, hadn't answered his calls in 6 months. He left a voicemail, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Sarah, it's Dad. I need you to go stay with your aunt in Charlotte for a few days. Don't ask questions. Just pack a bag and go. Please. I love you. Then he called an old friend from the Charlotte PD, a detective he'd trained years ago who owed him favors. Marcus, I need a protective detail on my daughter. Discreet, no official paperwork. She's being watched by someone connected to Captain Mercer. Mercer, Eli, what the hell are you into? Something big, something that could bring down half the department. Can you do it or not? A pause. I'll have someone on her within the hour, but you owe me an explanation when this is over. You'll get one? Thank you. Eli ended the call and sat in the silence, Ranger's head resting on his lap. The dog looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, sensing the weight of the decision he'd just made. There was no going back now. He pulled up the topographic map Patterson had marked and began planning his route to the old mining tunnels. If Caleb was still up there, still alive, Eli would find him. And once he had the boy's testimony, had a living witness to corroborate the notebook and the video, he'd have enough to take to federal authorities. Enough to end Mercer's career and send him to prison for the rest of his life. But first, he had to survive long enough to get there. Eli drove back to the cave as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of blood orange and purple. Ranger rode beside him, alert and watchful, her training kicking in as they approached dangerous territory. The cave entrance loomed ahead, dark and unwelcoming in the fading light. Eli parked his truck and grabbed his pack, loading it with supplies for a longer expedition into the mountains. Food, water, medical kit, rope, his service weapon. He was checking his flashlight batteries when Ranger growled. Low and deep, the warning sound that meant danger was close. Eli froze, his hand moving instinctively to his holster. "What is it, girl?" Ranger's nose pointed toward the tree line 50 yards from the cave entrance. Her hackles rose slowly, muscles tensing for action. Then Eli saw them. Two figures moving through the shadows between the pines. Not hikers, not rangers. The way they moved was deliberate, tactical, maintaining cover as they approached. Mercer had sent someone. Eli dropped behind his truck, pulling Ranger down with him. "Quiet," he whispered. The figure stopped at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by underbrush. Eli couldn't make out faces, but he could see the outline of weapons. Pistols held low and ready. They were here to kill him. For a long moment, nobody moved. The forest held its breath. Then one of the figures stepped forward, revealing himself. He was young, maybe 30, with a shaved head and the compact build of a former soldier. He carried his weapon with the casual competence of someone who'd used it before. "Elias Blackwood," he called out. "Captain Mercer wants us to talk. Come out, nobody gets hurt." Eli stayed behind the truck, calculating distances and angles. Two men, both armed, both positioned to cut off his escape routes. "Tell Mercer to come himself if he wants to talk," Eli shouted back. "That's not how this works. You've got 10 seconds to show yourself. After that, we come to you." Ranger tensed beside Eli, ready to attack on command. But sending her against armed men was suicide. Eli wouldn't sacrifice her for his own mistakes. 5 seconds, the man called. Eli made his decision. He stood slowly, hands visible, weapon still holstered. "Okay, I'm coming out." He stepped from behind the truck, Ranger glued to his side, still growling low in her chest. The second figure emerged from the trees, flanking to the right. Another young man, taller, with cold eyes that had seen violence and didn't flinch from it. "Smart choice," the first man said. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over everything you found in that cave. The notebook, the camera, any copies you made. Then you're going to get it in your truck and drive away. Forget you ever bought this place. Forget the name Caleb Hartley. Forget you ever knew Captain Mercer." "And if I refuse," the man's expression didn't change, "then we make sure you can't tell anyone what you found. Your choice." Eli's mind raced. He couldn't fight two armed men in the open, couldn't outrun them, couldn't protect Ranger and himself at the same time. But he could buy time. "The evidence isn't here," Eli said. "I sent copies to a friend. Insurance policy. If anything happens to me, they go straight to the FBI." It was a bluff, but a good one. The first man's jaw tightened. He pulled out a phone, typed a quick message, waited for a response. Then he looked back at Eli. "Captain says you're lying. Says you're too proud to ask for help. Too isolated to have friends left." Mercer knew him too well. The man raised his weapon, pointing it at Eli's chest. "Last chance. Hand over the evidence." Ranger's growl turned into a snarl. Her body coiled, ready to launch. "Ranger, no," Eli commanded, but he could feel her pulling against his control, every instinct screaming at her to protect him. The second man aimed his weapon at Ranger. "Call off your dog or I put it down." That's when Ranger made the choice for both of them. She exploded forward, 65 pounds of trained muscle and fury, closing the distance to the second man in 3 bounds. He fired, but Ranger was already airborne, her jaws clamping onto his gun arm with crushing force. The man screamed. The weapon fell from his hand. The first man swung his pistol toward Ranger. Eli drew his own weapon and fired twice, aiming low, hitting the man in the leg. He went down hard, his shot going wide. Ranger released the second man's arm and circled back to Eli, blood on her muzzle, but moving without a limp. unhurt. Both men were on the ground, wounded but alive. Eli kicked their weapons away and stood over them, his own gun steady. "Who sent you?" he demanded. "Say the name." The first man clutched his bleeding leg, his face twisted in pain. "Go to hell!" Eli pressed his boot against the wound. The man screamed. "I used to be a cop," Eli said quietly. "I know how to hurt someone without killing them. And right now, I don't have much to lose. So I'll ask one more time. Who sent you?" "Mercer," the man gasped. "Captain Mercer. He said you were digging into things that would get people killed. Said we were protecting the community. By murdering an unarmed man. By doing what we were told." Eli stepped back, his hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. These weren't criminals. They were cops. Probably young officers Mercer had recruited, fed lies about Eli being a threat, turned into his personal hit squad. Just like Mercer had turned Eli into an unwitting accomplice 3 years ago. He pulled out his phone and took photos of both men, their faces, their weapons, their wounds. Evidence that Mercer had sent armed officers to silence him. Then he zip-tied their hands and ankles with restraints from his truck and called 911. "Two men tried to rob me at my property," he told the dispatcher, giving the location. "Both wounded. Need ambulances and police. Yes, I'm armed. Licensed to carry. I'll be waiting." He hung up before they could ask more questions. By the time the local sheriff's department arrived 30 minutes later, Eli had his story straight. Home invasion, self-defense. The two men had refused to identify themselves, had threatened him, and his dog had fired first. All true, mostly. The sheriff, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, took his statement while EMTs loaded the wounded men into ambulances. She studied Eli with the keen eye of someone who'd seen enough crime scenes to know when a story didn't quite add up. "Your former Charlotte PD," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. And these two men just happened to attack you at your remote cave property for no reason." "I didn't say no reason. I said they didn't identify the reason." The sheriff glanced at the cave entrance, at Eli's truck, at Ranger, sitting calmly beside him, despite having just taken down an armed man. "This have anything to do with Captain Mercer?" she asked quietly. Eli's eyes sharpened. "Why would you ask that?" "Because one of those men works for him. Young officer out of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg department. And because Mercer's name has a way of coming up in situations that don't quite make sense, you have problems with Mercer." The sheriff was quiet for a moment, watching the ambulances pull away. "Let's just say I've learned to be very careful about what cases I share with Charlotte PD. Information has a way of disappearing when Mercer's involved." Eli made a decision. He pulled the notebook from his jacket and handed it to her. "Read this, then decide if you want to help me or walk away." The sheriff opened the notebook, her eyes moving across Caleb's desperate handwriting. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to anger as she read. "This is from the Hartley boy," she said, "the missing kid from 3 years ago." "That's right. And you found this where, hidden in this cave, along with video evidence showing Captain Mercer involved in drug trafficking, along with witness testimony that Mercer personally chased Caleb into the mountains and watched him nearly drown." The sheriff closed the notebook carefully as if it might disintegrate in her hands. "This is federal," she said, "way above my jurisdiction." "I know, but I need time to find Caleb before Mercer does. He's still alive, still hiding somewhere in these mountains. And once I have him, once I have a living witness, I can take all of this to the FBI and make it stick." "And you want me to what?" "Look the other way. I want you to file this as a home invasion. 2 armed men, unknown motives. Keep Mercer's name out of it for me. Give me 48 hours. The sheriff looked at the cave, at Eli, at Ranger. Then she handed the notebook back. 48 hours, she said. After that, I'm filing a report with every detail. Mercer's connections won't protect him from what's in that notebook. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you're right about Mercer, you're in more danger now than before. Those men will talk eventually, And when they do, Mercer will know you're not backing down. The sheriff climbed into her patrol car, then paused with the door open. For what it's worth, she said, I hope you find that boy. Hope you prove that bastard is everything I suspect he is. She drove away, leaving Eli alone with Ranger in the gathering darkness. Eli knelt beside his dog, running his hands over her body, checking for injuries. She was fine. A few scratches. Nothing serious. Good girl, he whispered. You saved my life. Ranger licked his face, her tail wagging slowly. Eli stood and looked toward the mountains, toward the distant peaks where Caleb might still be hiding. He had 48 hours, 2 days to find a boy who'd been running for 3 years, 2 days to outmaneuver a man who controlled half the police force in the region, 2 days to prove that justice, even delayed, was still worth fighting for. His phone buzzed, another message from the unknown number. You should have listened. Now it's too late for you and for him. Then a second message, GPS coordinates, in a single sentence. Come alone. Old Bridge at Ravens Creek. Midnight, or we finish what we started. Eli stared at the coordinates. They were 15 miles north of his current location, near the area Patterson had marked on the map, near the old mining tunnels, near where Caleb might be hiding. It was a trap, obviously. Mercer was done with warnings, done with intermediaries, but it was also an opportunity. Eli checked his weapon, loaded his pack, and looked at Ranger. One more mission, he said. One more chance to get it right. Ranger barked once. Ready. And together they walked into the darkness, toward the mountains, toward the truth that waited somewhere in the cold mountain night, toward Caleb Hartley, and toward whatever end Captain Graham Mercer had planned for them both. The old bridge at Ravens Creek had been abandoned for decades. Its wooden planks rotted through in places, iron supports rusted to lace. It spanned a narrow gorge where the creek ran fast and cold, fed by snowmelt from the higher peaks. The sound of rushing water filled the night, drowning out everything except the wind through the pines. Eli arrived at 11:30, parking his truck a mile back and hiking in with Ranger at his side. The coordinates led to a small clearing on the north side of the bridge, accessible only by a deer trail that wound through dense underbrush. A tactical nightmare. Limited sightlines, multiple approaches, perfect ambush territory. But Eli wasn't walking into this blind. Before leaving the cave, he'd called his old friend in Charlotte PD and told him everything. The notebook, the video, Patterson's testimony, the attack by Mercer's men. He'd uploaded copies of all the evidence to a secure cloud server and given his friend the access codes. If Eli didn't check in by dawn, everything would go straight to the FBI field office in Asheville. Insurance, the only kind that mattered now. Eli positioned himself behind a fallen log with a clear view of the bridge, Ranger pressed against his side, both of them invisible in the darkness. The moon was a thin crescent offering almost no light. Good for hiding, bad for seeing what was coming. At 11:55, a figure appeared on the far side of the bridge. Too small to be Mercer, too thin, moving with the hesitant, exhausted gait of someone who'd been running for too long. The figure stopped at the center of the bridge, silhouetted against the sky. Then a voice called out, young and hoarse from disuse. Are you the cop, the one looking for me? Eli's heart stopped. Caleb Hartley. He stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. I'm not a cop anymore. But yes, I'm looking for you. My name is Elias Blackwood. The figure tensed, ready to bolt. Blackwood, I know that name. You were on my case. You closed it. I did, and I've regretted it every day since. Caleb laughed, a bitter sound that cracked in the middle. Regret doesn't bring back 3 years. Doesn't give me my life back. You're right, it doesn't, but I'm here to make it right, to bring Mercer down, to give you justice. Justice, Caleb spat the word like poison. Justice is what got me hunted. Justice is what made me live like an animal in these mountains while everyone I loved thought I was dead. Eli took a step forward. Ranger moved with him, alert but not aggressive. Your parents never stopped looking, Eli said quietly. Your mother still puts up missing posters every year on your birthday. Your father keeps your room exactly as you left it. They never gave up on you. Caleb's silhouette wavered. For a moment, Eli thought he might collapse. I couldn't go back, Caleb said, his voice breaking. Mercer said he'd kill them if I came back. Said he'd make it look like an accident, a gas leak, a car crash, something nobody would question. I believed him. He can't hurt them anymore. I have evidence. Video of him at the warehouse, your notebook, witness testimony, enough to put him away for life. Evidence didn't save me 3 years ago. Because I didn't know the truth. I believed Mercer when he told me to close your case. I trusted him. That was my mistake, and I'm the one who has to live with it. But now I know better. Now I have proof. Caleb was silent for a long moment, the sound of rushing water filling the space between them. Why should I trust you, he finally asked. Because I'm the only chance you have to go home. And because if I wanted to hurt you, I would have brought Mercer instead of coming alone. Slowly, Caleb stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight that broke through the clouds. Eli had seen the photos from 3 years ago. A fresh-faced 18-year-old with a bright smile and clear eyes. The young man standing before him now looked like he'd aged a decade. His face was gaunt, covered in a patchy beard. His clothes were layers of scavenged fabric and animal hide. His hands were scarred and rough. But his eyes, when they met Eli's, were still sharp, still intelligent, still fighting. You found my notebook, Caleb said. Not a question. I did. And the video camera. I know what you saw at the warehouse. I know Mercer hunted you. I know everything. Caleb descended from the bridge, slowly favoring his left leg, an old injury poorly healed. When he reached the clearing, Ranger stood and approached him, nose working carefully. To Eli's surprise, Caleb knelt and let the dog sniff him. His hand trembling slightly reached out to touch Ranger's head. I remember you, Caleb whispered. You were there 3 years ago, part of the search team. I watched from the ridge when you tracked my scent to the creek. You would have found me if they'd let you keep looking. Ranger's tail wagged slowly. She recognized his scent too, had carried it in her memory for 3 years. Caleb looked up at Eli, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. Why did they stop the search? Because Mercer ordered it. Because he knew you were alive and he wanted you to stay lost. I almost died a dozen times that first winter. Frostbite, infections, starvation. I survived on rabbits and whatever I could trap. Learned to move every few days so Mercer couldn't track me. Learned to live like a ghost. Caleb stood and Eli saw the full extent of what survival had cost him. The permanent limp, the scars on his hands, the way he held himself, always ready to run. But you're still alive, Eli said. Still fighting. That takes strength most people don't have. It takes desperation, fear. I'm not strong. I'm just too scared to die. Eli pulled out his phone and showed Caleb the photo of his parents' house. The tire swing, the sign that read Hartley's, all welcome. Your parents are waiting, Eli said. Your mother asked me to tell you she never stopped believing, never stopped looking. Caleb's face crumpled. He turned away, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eli gave him space waiting while the young man processed 3 years of grief and isolation and fear. Ranger sat beside Caleb, offering the wordless comfort only animals can provide. Finally, Caleb wiped his eyes and turned back. There's something else you need to know, something I discovered over these 3 years. Tell me. Mercer didn't just come after me. There were others, 5 others that I know of, young people who worked around the border towns, who might have seen something they shouldn't have. They all disappeared over the last 10 years. All their cases were closed quickly, all labeled as runaways or accidents. Eli felt ice forming in his stomach. How do you know? Because I've been living in their hideouts, using their supplies, reading their messages carved into cave walls. They ran just like me, hid just like me, but they weren't as lucky. Are they all dead? Caleb shook his head. 3 of them are. I've found their remains over the years, died from exposure accidents, infection. But two others, I think they're still out there, still hiding. I've seen signs, fresh camps, recent tracks, messages left in places only someone running would know to look. Eli's mind raced. I closed some of those cases. Mercer assigned them to me personally. He used you, made you part of the cover-up without you even knowing it. That's how he operates. Gets good cops to do his dirty work by feeding them lies. The weight of that realization pressed down on Eli like a physical force. How many families had he failed? How many parents had he told to give up hope while their children hid in the wilderness, terrified and alone? We can still save them, Eli said, his voice rough. If they're alive, we can bring them home too. First, we have to survive Mercer. He knows you're looking for me. He knows you found the cave. He's not going to let either of us walk away from this. I know. That's why I have a plan. Eli pulled out his phone and showed Caleb the text message with the coordinates. Mercer sent this. Wanted me to come alone at midnight, but we're going to turn his trap into ours. How? By giving him exactly what he wants. Me at the old cave claiming I found you alive. I'll record everything he says. Get him to confess, then the FBI moves in. Caleb's eyes widen. The FBI is involved. They will be in 6 hours if I don't check in, but if we can get Mercer's confession on tape, we can accelerate the timeline. Have them waiting nearby when he shows up. He'll never confess. He's too smart. He'll confess if he thinks he's won. If he thinks killing me will solve all his problems. Men like Mercer, when they believe they're untouchable, they can't help but gloat. Caleb studied Eli for a long moment. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as justice. There's a difference. You could die. I could, but if I don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life running, and those other 2 kids will die in these mountains without ever seeing their families again. I can't live with that. Caleb was quiet, his eyes moving between Eli and Ranger and the dark forest surrounding them. What do you need me to do? He finally asked. Stay hidden. Let me handle Mercer. If something goes wrong, if I don't make it out, you go to the coordinates I'll give you. There'll be an FBI agent waiting with copies of all the evidence. You tell them everything. Your testimony will be enough to put Mercer away even without my recording. And if you do make it out, then we bring you home together. Caleb extended his hand. Eli shook it, feeling the calluses and scars of 3 years of survival. My mother, Caleb said quietly. Tell her I'm sorry I stayed away so long. Tell her I wanted to come home every single day. You can tell her yourself. Soon. They spent the next hour going over the plan. Eli would return to the cave and send a message to Mercer, claiming he had found evidence that Caleb was alive and wanted to negotiate. Mercer would come believing he could tie up loose ends. Eli would get him talking record everything and signal the FBI to move in. Simple. Direct. Probably suicidal. But it was the only play they had. At 2 in the morning, Eli left Caleb hidden in a shelter near the old mining tunnels protected by supplies Eli had brought. Ranger stayed with the young man both for protection and companionship. Eli had never been separated from his partner before, but he knew Caleb needed her more right now. The drive back to this cave took 90 minutes. Eli used the time to call his FBI contact, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd worked organized crime cases with him years ago. Eli Blackwood, she said when she answered. I heard you'd gone hermit. What do you need? I need a tactical team positioned near Pisgah National Forest in 6 hours, and I need them ready to move on my signal. That's a big ask at 3 in the morning. What's the target? Captain Graham Mercer, Charlotte Mecklenburg PD, drug trafficking, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and 5 counts of kidnapping. Silence on the other end. Then that's a hell of an accusation. I have video evidence, witness testimony, a survivor willing to testify, and I'm about to get a recorded confession. How? By making myself the target. Eli, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about, that's insane. It's necessary. Mercer has connections everywhere. If we go through normal channels, evidence will disappear. Witnesses will recant. We need him dead to rights, caught in the act. Chen was quiet for a moment. Send me what you have, all of it. If it's as solid as you say, I'll have a team in position by dawn. Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, I'm not going to be able to protect you. I know. Eli hung up and sent her everything. The notebook scans, the warehouse video, Patterson's written statement, photos of the cave, GPS coordinates of the meeting location. Then he typed out the message to Mercer. Found something in the cave, evidence the Hartley boy is alive. Recent activity. We need to talk. Face to face, the old location. 1 hour. He sent it and waited. The response came within 30 seconds. Stay there. I'm coming. Eli parked his truck inside the cave mouth and began setting up. His phone positioned on a shelf with a clear view of the cabin interior set to record. A backup audio recorder hidden in his jacket pocket. A third device planted near the entrance triggered by motion. 3 independent recordings. 3 chances to capture whatever Mercer said. If the captain was smart, he'd say nothing incriminating, would simply kill Eli and dispose of the evidence. But Eli was counting on pride, on the arrogance of a man who'd gotten away with corruption for years, on the need that powerful men had to justify their actions to make their victims understand why they deserved what was coming. Eli had seen it 100 times in interrogation rooms. The moment when a suspect, believing they'd won, couldn't resist explaining how clever they'd been. He was betting his life that Mercer would have that same moment. At 4:30 in the morning, headlights appeared at the cave entrance. Mercer arrived alone just as Eli had hoped. The captain stepped out of an unmarked sedan, moving with the careful precision of someone expecting trouble. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but Eli could see the outline of a weapon under his jacket. Blackwood, Mercer called into the cave. I'm here, let's talk. Eli stepped into the dim light from the cave opening, hands visible and empty. Captain, thanks for coming. Mercer's eyes scanned the cave, cataloging exits and hiding places. You said you found evidence. Show me. I found more than evidence. I found the whole story. The warehouse, the drugs, the 5 other kids who disappeared, Caleb Hartley's testimony about what he saw. Mercer's expression didn't change, but Eli saw the slight tightening around his eyes. The tell of a poker player who'd just been dealt a bad hand. That's quite an accusation, Mercer said calmly, based on what? A notebook written by a disturbed kid, based on video footage, witness statements, physical evidence that puts you at the scene. Video can be faked. Witnesses can be mistaken. You know how this works, Eli. You were a good detective once, before you lost your nerve. I didn't lose my nerve. I lost my faith in the system, in people like you who corrupt it from the inside. Mercer took a step closer, his hand drifting toward his concealed weapon. You want to know the truth, Vine? I'll tell you the truth. That kid at the warehouse 3 years ago, he saw a legitimate police operation. Undercover work, deep cover that I couldn't explain to anyone, not even my own department. Is that the story you're going with? It's not a story, it's classified federal work, and you're interfering with an active investigation. Eli laughed, the sound echoing off the cave walls. You're good, Graham, I'll give you that. Almost convincing. But I know better. I know about the money, the payoffs, the bodies. Mercer's facade cracked. His hand moved to his weapon, drawing it smoothly. You always were too curious for your own good, too stubborn to know when to quit. That's not a denial. Why bother denying it to a dead man? Mercer aimed the gun at Eli's chest. You want the truth? Here it is. I've been running product through this region for 12 years. Made more money than my pension will ever pay. Helped more people get what they needed than any drug enforcement policy ever could. And yes, a few kids got in the way. Saw things they shouldn't have seen, made choices that forced my hand. You murdered children. I protected my operation. There's a difference. And I would have let you live, Eli. Would have let you rot in this cave with your guilt and your bourbon. But you couldn't leave it alone, couldn't accept that some things are bigger than your precious morality. Eli's phone was recording every word. He just needed to keep Mercer talking a little longer. What about the Hartley boy you chased him into those mountains? Watched him nearly drown. I thought the creek would finish the job. Save me the trouble. But the little bastard survived. Lived out here like an animal while I erased every trace of him from official records. Used you to close the case. You were so eager to prove yourself after the Duval shooting that you didn't question anything I told you. I was a fool. You were a tool, a useful idiot, and now you're a liability. Mercer's finger tightened on the trigger. That's when the cave entrance exploded with movement. Ranger launched from the darkness where Eli had positioned her. Before Mercer arrived, 65 pounds of fury and training aimed at the hand holding the gun. Her jaws clamped onto Mercer's wrist with crushing force. The gun fired the round, ricocheting off stone, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Mercer screamed, trying to shake the dog off, but Ranger held on with the iron determination of a K9 trained never to release until commanded. Eli rushed forward, tackling Mercer to the ground. They grappled Mercer's free hand, clawing at Eli's face, Eli pinning the captain's arms. Ranger released the gun hand and shifted to Mercer's leg, biting down hard enough to make the older man howl in pain. Ranger, release, Eli commanded. The dog let go, immediately backing away, but staying alert, ready to attack again if needed. Eli yanked Mercer's arms behind his back and secured them with zip ties from his pocket. The captain's weapon lay several feet away, kicked there during the struggle. Mercer spat blood, his face twisted with rage. You're dead, Blackwood. You and everyone you care about. My lawyers will bury you. My connections will make sure you never see daylight again. I don't think so. A new voice echoed from the cave entrance. Caleb Hartley stepped into the light, holding Eli's phone with the recording still running. Behind him, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as FBI tactical teams flooded the cave. Weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Agent Chen appeared, her badge visible on her vest. Captain Graham Mercer, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Mercer's face went white as he saw Caleb. You're dead. I watched you drown. You watched me survive, Caleb said quietly, and now I'm watching you fall. The FBI agents hauled Mercer to his feet, reading him his rights as they led him toward their vehicles. He fought every step, shouting about his connections, his lawyers, his friends in high places. But Eli could see it in the captain's eyes. The moment he realized it was over, that all his power, all his corruption, all his careful planning had crumbled because he couldn't resist the urge to explain himself to a washed-up detective in a forgotten cave. Pride, the fatal flaw of every criminal Eli had ever caught. Agent Chen approached Eli, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever seen a retired cop do. But it worked. This time, don't make it a habit. She turned to Caleb. Mr. Hartley, we're going to need your full testimony. Everything you saw, everything you experienced in over the last 3 years. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were distant. The other two, the ones still hiding, we have to find them. We will, Chen promised. We have their names from the files Mercer tried to bury. We'll have search teams in the mountains by noon. Over the next 6 hours, the cave became a command center. FBI teams spread through the surrounding mountains following the coordinates Caleb provided, searching for the other survivors. Eli gave his statement 3 times, walking investigators through every piece of evidence, every connection, every crime that had led to this moment. By early afternoon, they had their first breakthrough. A 19-year-old girl named Emma Reeves, missing for 14 months, found living in a lean-to shelter 8 miles north of the cave. Malnourished, terrified, but alive. 3 hours later, a 22-year-old named David Cross, missing for 2 years, discovered hiding in an abandoned ranger station near the Canadian border. 2 survivors, 2 families reunited. The other 3 had not been as fortunate. Their remains were recovered over the following week, given proper burials, their families finally receiving the closure they'd been denied for years. But it was Caleb's reunion that Eli would remember most. They drove to Willow Creek as the sun set, Caleb sitting in the passenger seat of Eli's truck. Ranger curled in the back, all of them exhausted but carrying something that felt almost like peace. When they pulled up to the Hartley trailer, Martha was hanging laundry in the yard. She looked up at the sound of the truck, her hands pausing on a bedsheet. Caleb opened the door and stepped out slowly, as if afraid the world might disappear if he moved too quickly. Martha's hands flew to her mouth. The sheet fell to the ground. "Mom," Caleb said, his voice breaking. She ran to him, this weathered woman who'd spent 3 years grieving, and threw her arms around her son. They collapsed together, holding each other, both of them sobbing with a grief and joy too deep for words. Leonard appeared in the doorway, saw his son, and simply stood there, tears streaming down his face. Eli stayed in the truck, watching through the windshield, his own eyes burning. This was what justice looked like. Not a verdict or a sentence or a badge. This moment, this reunion, this proof that sometimes fighting for the truth mattered. Ranger climbed into the front seat and rested her head on Eli's lap, sensing his emotion. "We did good, girl," Eli whispered. "We finally did something right." 3 weeks later, Eli stood at the cave entrance with a carpenter named Joe, discussing plans for the renovation. The cave would become the Hartley Memorial Center, a refuge for missing persons, a training facility for search and rescue teams, and a monument to the 5 young people who'd hidden in these mountains. 3 who hadn't survived, and 2 who had. Eli had donated the property and most of his pension to fund the project. It felt right, a way to turn a place of fear into a place of hope. Sarah, his daughter, stood beside him the first time they had been together in 7 months. She'd reached out after seeing the news coverage of Mercer's arrest after learning what her father had done. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said quietly. Those 5 words meant more than any medal or commendation ever could. "I'm sorry," Eli replied, "for Marcus Duval, for the years I wasted feeling sorry for myself, for not being the father you deserved. You're here now, that's what matters." They stood together in silence, watching Joe and his crew work on the cabin, reinforcing the structure, adding solar panels, and a communication system that would allow hikers in distress to call for help. Ranger explored the cave mouth, sniffing at the changes, her tail wagging, as she investigated every corner. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. Eli had thought about that question every day since Mercer's arrest. He had no job, no career, no purpose beyond the bottle and the regrets. But standing here, seeing the memorial taking shape, he realized he did have a purpose. "I'm going to find the others," he said. "All the missing persons cases Mercer corrupted, all the families who were told to stop looking. I'm going to review every single one and make sure the truth comes out." That's a big job. "I've got time, and Ranger needs something to do in her retirement." As if understanding, Ranger barked once and returned to Eli's side. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in years. "Need any help?" Eli looked at his daughter, this brilliant young woman who'd inherited his stubbornness and his sense of justice and felt something like hope. "I'd like that," he said. On the day the Hartley Memorial Center officially opened, over 300 people attended the ceremony. Martha and Leonard cut the ribbon, Caleb standing between them, healthy now, gaining weight, beginning to look like himself again. Eli gave a short speech about second chances and the importance of never giving up even when the system failed. Agent Chen spoke about the FBI's commitment to reviewing all cases connected to Mercer's corruption. The sheriff who'd given Eli 48 hours to find Caleb presented Ranger with a special commendation for valor. But it was the wooden sign above the cave entrance that captured the moment best. Eli had carved it himself, working late into the night for a week, making sure every letter was perfect. It read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Here, hope survived the darkness." Below that, in smaller letters, "In memory of those we lost, in celebration of those we found." As the crowd dispersed and the sun set over the mountains, Eli sat on a bench outside the cave with Ranger at his feet. He watched families embrace, saw Caleb laughing with old friends, noticed Emma Reeves and David Cross comparing notes about their experiences, beginning the long process of healing. His phone buzzed. A text from Martha Hartley. "Thank you for giving me my son back. Thank you for not giving up." Eli typed a reply. "He never gave up. I just helped him come home." The truth was more complicated than that. Caleb had survived through his own strength, his own resourcefulness, his own refusal to let Mercer win. But Eli had played his part, had used his skills, his connections, his willingness to risk everything to uncover the truth. And in doing so, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. Redemption. Not the kind that erased past mistakes, not the kind that brought Marcus Duval back to life or undid the pain he'd caused that young man's family, but the kind that proved even broken people could still do good, could still fight for justice, could still make a difference in a world that often felt too dark to bear. A car pulled up, and Mercer's former deputy chief stepped out, his face grim. The internal investigation had revealed 14 other officers connected to Mercer's operation. The entire Charlotte-Mecklenburg Narcotics Division was being restructured from the ground up. The two officers who'd attacked Eli at the cave were among the first to turn state's evidence, their testimony corroborating everything Eli had documented. Facing charges of attempted murder and conspiracy, they'd taken plea deals in exchange for exposing the full extent of Mercer's network. "Blackwood," the deputy chief said, extending his hand, "the department wants to offer you your badge back, full reinstatement. We need good cops now more than ever." Eli looked at the offered badge, this symbol he'd worn for 30 years, this identity he'd lost and mourned. Then he looked at the cave, at the family still celebrating a ranger sleeping peacefully in the evening sun. "Thank you," Eli said, "but I'm needed here more." The deputy chief nodded, understanding. "If you change your mind, the offer stands." After he left, Sarah appeared with 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside her father, and they watched the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "No regrets?" she asked. Eli thought about that, about all the years in uniform, about the cases solved and the ones that got away, about Marcus Duval and the shot he couldn't take back, about Caleb Hartley and the 3 years he'd spent hiding in the darkness. "Plenty of regrets," he said honestly, "but also plenty of reasons to keep going." Ranger stirred at his feet, her tail thumping once against the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth and possibility. And Elias Blackwood, 58 years old, former detective, recovered alcoholic, and the man who'd bought a cave for $400 looking for a place to disappear, realized he'd found something far more valuable instead. A reason to live. A purpose worth fighting for. And proof that even in the deepest darkness, even when all hope seemed lost, the truth had a way of surviving. Just like Caleb Hartley. Just like the human spirit itself. The cave that had once been a prison of fear had become a beacon of hope, and that Eli thought was justice of the truest kind. Not perfect, not without cat, but real and hard one, and worth every scar it had left behind. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to the mountains, to the survivors, to the families who'd never stopped believing, and to second chances for everyone who still had the courage to fight for them.